1:30. I welcome everybody to the regular Wednesday afternoon work session. Today we have a focus program. This is basically for the edification of the commissioners, trying to understand in more detail how they individually view HHS and vice versa. So there'll be a lot of detail here. If you have questions, you feel free to raise your hand, or if you're on a phone, I think *9 will do that. And I will try to keep an eye on that while concentrating on the content. We have before we go, Commissioner Dahl, is there anything you want to add, say?
I don't have anything to add to the intro.
Okay. So we have with us Gina James and Carol Harris. And I'll turn it over to them.
Okay, there we go. Good afternoon, Gina James, Health and Human Services. We have a couple of items that we'll talk through today with the board at the request of the board. The first item is on upcoming contracts. So I've provided a list of our upcoming contracts. We do have several that are planned to be in front of the board soon. And so we've listed those out on the spreadsheet. And I'll start with a very high overview of these, and then we can get into more detail as needed. On the first page of the spreadsheet is the Human Services. Sorry, I'm going to move a little bit here. Okay. The first page of the spreadsheet is the Human Services contracts that are coming up. The second page is Health Department contracts that are coming up. So on the Human Services side, we have an agreement coming up regarding the Veterans Relief Fund. We work with different veteran service organizations to help us complete applications with veterans who are needing some assistance. So we have a provider that does this with us, and we're updating this agreement. It's a 1-year agreement. So the agreement will be January 2023 through December of 2023. There's no funding involved in this one, just an agreement to complete the applications and submit them to us, and where we issue the assistance.
So in this case, the assistance still comes through the Veterans Relief Fund, and they're just acting kind of as a collector, as a front end.
Correct. So they meet with veterans at their service organizations, complete the application with the veteran, help them get documents if they need documents to submit, and turn them
The
in.
formality of that seems a little odd to me, because I would think the Veterans Relief Fund would accept an application from anybody.
It goes through the veteran service organizations, I think partly because of there has to be documentation provided that someone is a veteran. And I think it has to be with an honorable discharge. So there's certain paperwork that has to be submitted and verified, and these service organizations help those individuals make sure they have that information.
If an individual came to us with all that packaged information from the DAV chapter here and one from a DAV chapter elsewhere, they would be treated equally?
Right, yeah. If we get a completed application from the different organizations, we would look at those and determine what was needed.
I don't see any issue here, but it does seem strange. It seems like an application is an application.
Yeah, but I don't really see an issue.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
The next round, the next section here on the human services contracts is in regards to the document recording fees. So we have some contracts in place that we've had for a couple of years with service providers for different services or programs. So the first three are contracts for coordinated entry. One each with Community House on Broadway, Cowlitz Family Health Center, and the Emergency Support Shelter. We also have a contract with Emergency Support Shelter, a second contract for shelter operations, just supporting their basic shelter operations. We also have a contract with Lower Columbia CAP. This is a permanent supportive housing project. It's often called the group home. There's six individuals, men specifically, that live in this permanent supportive housing project. And then there's two new agreements that are coming in front of the board. I believe they're scheduled for the 31st. These are grant agreements with a housing authority and campus towers for the affordable housing projects.
Hey, should we talk about those here now, or?
We can absolutely, or I can go through the rest and we can come back to specific ones, however you'd like to do it.
I would prefer to start to talk a little bit about this. How do you feel?
Yeah, I'm fine with that, Art.
Okay. A general overall question is, we're using document recording funds, and most of these entities are now located in Longview, and based on the ordinance, the resolution they passed, how does that impact any of this?
I don't think it does. I don't think there's anything in the RCW language around document recording fees that would say that, if the city is receiving their own document recording fees and we have some, that then we wouldn't fund any projects in the city of Longview, for example. I don't think there's any of that type of language. So I don't think it interferes in that way. Some of the other grants, like community development block grants, are different. The state has certain rules about areas.
Right. Right.
But I don't think we have any of that with these document recording fees.
Do you have any thoughts on here? There's something that does bother me a little, maybe.
Well, my only thoughts would be that if you knew they were getting other funds, you may want to know what that is versus what you're going to give. It may come into play as to how much you give. Sorry, I got a tickle.
Okay, you're saying if the city of Longview were awarding some funds to these entities, we may want to be aware of how much they're giving, and consider that with how much we're.
I mean, it could be a consideration.
Sure.
So what bothers me is not the concept that the city of Longview wants to go its own. It's that we get a pot of document recording funds, and city of Longview says, I want my fair share out of that. So when we give more to the city of Longview indirectly this way, we're taking that away from other people's fair share. So I'm scratching my head and saying, is that really correct? I would argue, say, on the emergency support shelter, that there, best of my knowledge, people come from any place in the county there. So that wouldn't necessarily be a conflict. That applies to all these other ones too, that argument?
Correct. They may be, or their primary buildings may be located in Longview, but they serve anyone in the county, for example. So like our coordinated entry services. Their main sort of headquarters are in the city of Longview, but Family Health Center, for example, has these satellite locations up in Castle Rock, down in Woodland, and they
Okay.
can do those services in those areas as well.
Do we need to know any client breakdown in terms of where they're from? Again, I think I'm okay with this, but I want to be sure that we're not shortchanging someone. You know, part of the issue of splitting up the pot is that there is an implicit assumption that the pot was put together for the optimum use of the money. When you split the pot up, you don't have that anymore. You don't have the law of large numbers really helping you. So then if the fair share is given over, and I don't know how to define fair share, we'll have to discuss that. It's what I said, it seems like the city of Longview could do its unfair distribution, if you will. So they would pick up everything we distribute here, but I suspect their intent isn't at all that way. They have their own programs. And one of the things you've heard me wrestle with a lot is the complexity, the intertwining of all kinds of programs. So currently you've supplied us with a document with 6 pages of agencies or something like that involved in that. Now we're going to add more. And the inefficiency of that isn't a good thing. And the point you made is another example. There has to be continued coordination. And it strikes me that we're maybe setting a precedence that is troublesome, because all the resources, if we do the allocation according to that, but include all the other municipalities, which wouldn't seem an unreasonable thing to do. If you're doing it for Longview, do it for everybody else. Then we end up with a pot of money that one could argue should be exclusively for the residents outside the city limits. Any thoughts on that?
Well, the only thing I probably a little different thought on that is these funds are going to like these specific entities. They happen to be located in Longview, but what's their charter? We're kind of dependent that their charter is countywide or it's whatever. And the other way, the city of Longview isn't dishing that out. You know, it's just another thought. These entities just happen to be located there, but their charter is really to help the county.
Right, but the problem is not that. The problem is it's coming out of document recording fees, which have a constraint on how they should be used, and based on what the resolution from Longview is they're saying we want all the money that is, however, allocated to Longview, regardless of its applicability to anything else. And it's giving me a little bit of a headache.
I do look forward to learning more about what that will look like with that resolution passed, and looking at, you know, what amount are we looking at that will go to the city. They have I don't know if they've made this choice yet, but the RCW gives the choice to either adopt the county's 5-year plan or to create their own task force. And that task force would then create their own city focused 5-year plan to address homelessness.
Right.
And so I do know that, you know, if they decide to create their own plan, they will be required to include certain components from the Department of Commerce, the same as we are required. and those will be the same things, right? And so there will need to be some coordination on what that looks like and how we're looking to utilize our funds and how they're looking to utilize that, because
So, one odd thing about the homeless plan is that it's pretty fluid and sometimes it leads and sometimes it lags, and we've
Mhm.
seen them both, and that's kind of weird, but a good thing because we really ought to let common sense drive it, not that. Okay, so then based on what we might expect, then they would allocate some of the funding. So roughly speaking, the third would of the DRF funds that we receive would go to Longview under this new thing. And then, so would we be deducting a third from what we give to these other entities?
we would have that much less that we would be collecting each year from doc recording fees. We're not spending everything that we receive in revenue right now. So giving the city their fair share of the doc recording fees doesn't equate to having to cut programs, because we're not spending everything we get. And so we have some.
Right, I realize that, but I don't like the argument because we have to I look at the big picture. Because you have the money doesn't mean you ought to spend it. We're getting the rules changed on us and trying to cope with what that change should be from if I could make it a little easier on us, I think we're going to go through with this. So I'm not trying to argue not to do it, but we've got to look at the long picture
Sure.
here and see what are the implications. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, sitting in their meeting, they were discussing whether to go with the county plan or
Mhm.
do their own or start with the county plan and adjust from that. And they did ask Assistant City Manager Swanson what the city would expect to get. Now, to be totally accurate, you probably have to go back and look at the tape, but I'm pretty sure she said in the neighborhood of like 75,000 a quarter. And she expected the first check probably in April.
I think you're right.
I could be.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, and I think that equated to about 300,000 annually. And that was based off of 2021 first quarter numbers, which
Yeah.
were pretty high, I think. So
If I was doing a budget, I'd have to take that into account when I looked at other places. So to me, it could affect some of these, Arn. Because
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I've lost my train of thought specifically in that. It's, let me just stop for a moment, let somebody else say something.
Sure. I was going to say, I think I mentioned this. I look forward to learning more about what the exact numbers will be and what that looks like, whether they're, would adopt the county's plan or not, and how we would be working together with them as we move through this process, and would certainly love to sit back down and look at the numbers, once we know exactly what those numbers are, and figure out how we're being planful.
Yeah, one of the questions, just to mention it, we can't answer it here now, is what is the fair share? I could see an argument that says you just do it per capita, in which case a third is pretty close.
And I think the RCW sets that. I think
I didn't see that, but you think it's there?
yeah, the RCW language says that they can collect an amount equal to the amount of real estate excise tax. So it would be this.
Right, I did read
That's-
that, but that's not per capita. That would mean if, let's say there was a year in which no houses were sold in Longview, and they would get $0 then because they didn't contribute to the DRF pool.
Mhm.
And that's a complication that
Mhm.
we ought to look at. At the bottom line, I'm not trying to be difficult on it. I'm trying to not let some group subsidize another group. And that's really what I'm throwing out in each instance. Okay, these contracts begin in January for the most part, right? So they're already along, and
Mhm.
they're going along with the concept that at some point they'll receive this amount. So if we decided not to give a contract or a grant to Community House on Broadway for the 53,568, there's nothing they're doing this January that says that we owe them a piece of the 53.
I mean, when you
568.
look at the terms of contracts, correct, their current contract expired December, so we're in the process of, for the board to consider. If that were to happen, I would maybe ask the board to consider reimbursing the 1 month, whatever that looks like.
That's really a question. I don't have any objection to reimbursing something that's ongoing just because we're late on a contract. Yeah,
Yeah, I don't have any issue with that either.
yeah. But there are some other ones, like the emergency support shelter. That's not a service per se that's quantifiable, right? Like the coordinated entry is sort of a per event fee. It's a not.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. I think I understand what you're saying. The emergency support shelter, their doors have been open. So they're, sheltering people.
Yeah.
Where coordinated entry is different. They can control a little bit more of what the individuals that they work with.
Tell me a little bit, interrupt me anytime. Okay. Tell me a little bit about the emergency support shelter. It used to be purely emergency support. And then they got to try and expand into other areas. And I thought that was probably not the right thing. Who's eligible? What things do they do?
Yeah, so I think they have sort of two sections, I guess. I would maybe think about it similar to like there's CHOB and then there's core health, sort of two different subsets. So emergency support shelter has the shelter side, just sheltering victims of domestic violence in their shelter. They do have to meet certain criteria. They, ESS also receives some state funding that is pretty specific. And that's what this contract supports, is just that shelter function.
This contract is right, not the coordinated entry one.
Right. They're related somewhat. So we support their shelter operations, and then we have a separate contract for coordinated entry. And so if there's individuals they're serving that are staying at their shelter, the staff at ESS will do the coordinated entry piece with those individuals at the shelter.
Let's say this evening, domestic violence event occurs and someone really needs to go in a safe place. Is this available to them on that kind of situation? Yes,
you're asking about the shelter piece?
Yeah.
Yes.
The other piece is just a coordinate entry, or I'm confused a little bit. I like the shelter concept for domestic violence and emergencies. There's a bus crash on the freeway and there are 12 people who have no place to go, and that one's an outlandish one. But the most common one is kids having problem with mom and dad, maybe apply here, but mom and dad having problems.
Sure. Yeah. So they could access shelter immediately, assuming that the shelter has capacity, right?
I'm sort of asking that too.
Yeah, they do run into capacity issues, and I know they try to be as creative as they can about finding other options as well. hotels, motel rooms, those kinds of things, staying with family, friends, whoever. They can help connect the individual with a safe place for the night. The coordinated entry piece, once people are in shelter, the coordinated entry piece would not happen as any type of requirement for someone to get into shelter. It would be after the fact. And it really is to help connect with certain resources. There's specific housing programs in the community, for example. There's one in particular that the county is not involved in funding, but that particular project is specific to serving people who have been in domestic violence situations. The only way that that program can get referrals is through coordinated entry. And so they'll connect with the individuals after they've already been admitted into the shelter, do the coordinated entry piece, and then that would allow us to make that referral to that program if there's an opening.
Big difference is the word emergency.
Sure.
So those are the two pieces, because you were saying emergency shelter is grown beyond helping domestic violence. And I thought you said that, well, what we fund is the domestic violence piece. There's another
Correct.
piece.
They have started offering another section of services, crime victim services.
Okay,
So they have another campus where they do crime victim services. And so they'll help people through that sort of justice system process if there's restraining orders that have to be filed, if there's those types of things because of their either being a victim of crime or exposed to domestic violence, that type of thing. So it's sort of a separate section of their services that they offer. But for these particular contracts are based on the shelter side.
yeah, sounds like those two probably work a little bit hand in hand. It was just more for my education to see, and that's funded through somebody else.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just what's your sort of thinking or preference on these? The kind of question I'm asking, I think you can't predict you're going to be a victim of a crime, and you can't predict domestic violence or the first order.
I think if my personal opinion on it, I think they're services that have value and worked well.
They're kind of a safety net that I
Yeah.
think most people are willing. It's open to anybody. It's not fixing.
They don't
someone's
try to
plumbing
turn
problem.
anybody away. They try
Yeah.
to fix it. And I think that
So
it's
then
valuable.
so then the only problem I have is how does that qualify for DRF funds?
Emergency shelter.
Yeah, because you're really not tackling the homeless.
Well, the individuals who access emergency shelter because of domestic violence situations are considered homeless according to HUD and state definitions. So that's how it fits into document recording fees.
Thank you. You understand me completely. I like things to be clear and relatable. And the victims of domestic violence, that's a little bit different, but we're not DRFing that, right?
Right.
Okay. It still is a worthwhile program, but.
Yeah, I've hate to say it, over the years, I've seen it with my employees. So I know I hate to say it, but over the years, I've experienced it with an employee here or there. And it's nice to have someplace for them, because
Quite nice, yeah.
That's a nasty situation.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so how do we determine, like in this case, 100,000?
So this is one of the contracts that the county has been part of. We've supported emergency support shelter for quite a number of years. Historically, the funding amount has been, let's see, now I've got to try to remember. I believe it was closer to 90, maybe 85 or 90 thousand. It was an odd number. Maybe it was 92,000, something like that. When we were in the middle of COVID and there was, they were having capacity issues and this increase with individuals needing assistance, the board approved rounding the award amount up to 100,000. So that's where it has been the last few years.
Okay, so
I think we've talked a little bit about this, and I would describe these like, in my world, I call them like a line of credit. It's set here, and then you draw against it based on some circumstance that tells you to draw against it. So it could reach the max at the end of the year, or it could be different.
Correct.
So these are, what we're seeing here is always max figures.
Correct. They're an up to amount. We call them cost reimbursement contract. So they have the expense and then they invoice the county for reimbursement of that expense. So it could be up to this amount. It could be under this amount. I was going to talk a little bit about that on the CAP contract. I'll
okay.
wait till we finish this discussion.
Yeah, so I didn't realize that 100K was basically you get a bill and just at the end of the year, you don't want it to sum up beyond 100,000.
It's right. So I think they've come in just under 100,000 the last couple of years at the end of the annual cycle. And in which case the remainder just stays with the county in the doc recording fee fund.
Okay. Do you foresee that we should increase this?
I haven't had that conversation with ESS in a while. I'd be happy to do that, to touch base with them to see how they're doing. If the board's interested in considering that,
Your thoughts?
Who would you talk with?
Emergency support shelter.
With them themselves?
Mhm.
I think that kind of conversation is helpful. It is to me, because I like to see the trends that they're seeing.
Mhm.
Hopefully I've been to a couple of their fundraisers to help support,
And that's gone by the wayside with COVID and it
Yeah.
takes a long time to build back up again.
build back up. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay.
So you would not be opposed to, let's say Gina came back and said, oh, by the way, it ran through my mind. Let me apologize, Carol Harrison, not Harrison. So you would not be opposed if Gina came back and said, why don't we make that 125?
I'd entertain it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So just to
Okay.
give you
I'm
the
not-
latitude of,
Okay.
I don't want to put blanket approvals out there, but I'm not
well,
opposed
that's
to
kind
looking.
of what I'm being a little cautious
Yeah.
here, because the next follow-up question is Gina has to assure us that the county is not being abused by this. I mean, we want to help, but we don't want to be abused.
Yeah.
Sure. It would be interesting to learn more about, if they have any gaps right now and what that looks like. And so I'm happy to have that conversation with them.
Yeah. Okay, you were going to talk about the next project.
Yeah, so we have the contract with Lower Columbia CAP. This is the group home project. They serve 6 men in their house. These individuals are individuals who are considered sort of frequent flyers, if you will, in the community. They may be in and out of jail, in and out of the emergency department. So this home offers an opportunity to obtain and maintain stable housing for a period of time while they work on some other life goals as well.
That's the home you showed me once.
Yes, we went on a tour
Yeah.
a couple years ago of the home.
Why is the dollar amount not 96,000?
So over the last couple of years, and this goes back to Commissioner Dahl's question about up to amounts. Over the last couple of years, the contract amount has been 96,000. When we looked at the utilization, it has come down over the years. And so we were sort of truing it up to what has been being utilized from this contract. I think there's been quite a bit of additional programs from the state and opportunities to provide case management and things like that. And so I know that CAP is engaged in some of that, and so they're utilizing those programs, which in turn is decreasing this particular cost for this contract.
And so that's 6 people
Mhm.
and so that's about 8,000 a year per person. Yeah,
Who told me to
close
bring a
enough.
calculator? Someone told me to bring a calculator and I didn't do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's close enough. It's actually a little less, call it 7,000, just.
Yeah, so,
And so that's about little more than 500 a month.
yeah,
Still seems pretty spendy to me in terms of a housing program. Particularly since it's sort of it's a college dormitory setting, more or less.
but it's good to see it's been cut pretty much in half. I mean, I like that you're paying attention. If they're going to utilize half of it over so many years, why offer the full?
Mhm.
Yeah. So you're not bothered by the expense that we're paying for a house, essentially 7,000 a month?
Well, what rolls around in my mind is where could you use that more productively for others? I mean, here's what I'd say. If we were short and we had emergency shelter running short because we didn't have funds, I would shift that in a heartbeat over to that type of need versus the need for people that are in and out because they can't get it right.
Mhm.
I know people think I'm harsh on that, but we need to start.
Okay, so let me sum that up like this, and we're okay with this now, and that's because, like before, we have the funding available now to do more than we might otherwise be constrained to doing, but we're trying to look at the long term also. So,
Sure.
Okay, that sound fair?
Yeah, that sounds fair.
Okay. And Deborah, you come to join us?
Yes.
Do you want to talk?
Well, I wanted to,
Can you come up to the podium? Sorry. You've got some numbers for us, don't you?
I do have some paperwork here. I was listening and I thought I wanted to come up and talk to you because we've been talking about the resolution from the city of
Yeah.
Longview.
She goes, I
Make sure
see
you
it.
speak into the microphone closer.
I see an ex-banker up there. I need to bring paperwork.
So just from our research on these RCWs and talking with prosecuting attorney's office, them giving us the resolution starts the process of being able to receive the funds. So the RCW says that they can give us the resolution and it's calculated by, if you take what we receive in excise tax for the real estate excise tax, you take that figure and you calculate the percentage that the city of Longview gets to come out to that percentage. And then the amount of money that we receive under that certain homeless housing recording fees. You take that by the quarter and figure it by calculating by that percentage that from the real estate excise tax.
So just to be sure, so if no houses were sold in city of Longview, then that percentage would be 0?
If we did not collect any excise tax in a quarter, yeah, that would be 0, but
And it's done by quarter, you're trying to tell us.
yes, it has to be calculated at least quarterly.
All of that information is currently easily available, isn't it?
Yes, there's the RCWs that are in the resolution explain that. And just to be certain, I did check with a couple of other counties that are calculating it, and they share their calculations, and that's how they're doing it.
So because of the timing of the resolution, it probably begin, 1st of January this year through March.
Yes, I would, since this, I would say the date that this resolution was done would be the triggering event, so it would start on the 12th. So,
Okay,
yes.
I'm very generous. Okay, do you have any questions, Rick?
No, that makes
Thank
sense.
you. And you probably looked back at 2022 and said what that number would have been?
Yes, I just did it for the first quarter of 22. I didn't do the whole year.
Right.
Because that in just calculating out if I have all the right
Yeah,
accounts that it's going into on our treasurer's report. Yes.
and that number is?
For the first quarter, if we use the numbers from January through March 2022 would be $73,405.
Okay,
That's
thank you.
pretty close. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So
Just out of curiosity, do you have the numbers for the remainder of that on that quarter?
the total that was collected for that portion of the homeless housing recording fee for that first quarter was $262,464.
Okay, so it's in excess of a third in this case.
Yeah, the calculation was 27.96% of the real estate excise tax.
Was how much?
27.96%.
Yeah. The third would have
Does
been,
that sound about right?
third would have been more around 90.
Oh, of course. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah. Don't do arithmetic in public. It's embarrassing.
Yeah, we need the calculators up here.
What we need is a third person hidden behind a curtain. Okay, thank you, Deborah. Was there something else you'd like to?
Well, just, working on this, and it would be my office that would do this calculation, and we disperse the funds to the cities. We collect their excise tax and the property tax, and we distribute that to them monthly. And we would, what I'm thinking is we'll just incorporate this into our calculations on those every quarter and add this to when we make the payment to them. But just, we need to respond. We were talking about sending a letter to the city of Longview, but I wanted to make sure you guys understood.
Sending them a letter saying?
Letting them know that we received this and how we would anticipate that we were going to calculate it. And, the quarters, just how it was, how we see it all playing out on the payments.
Are we obligated to, let me back up. You said you typically send them payments on a monthly basis for other issues.
Mhm.
Doing this on a quarterly basis, is that something that makes it a little harder for you? Would you like to do it on a monthly basis?
Well, I think with the calculation, I'd have to go back and read the RCW and it says, it talks about, maybe it just says at least quarterly. Yeah, I don't know if it would make a difference doing it monthly. I'd have to look into that a little bit more. When we're paying them their excise and their property taxes, it's just, we just give them the money that we collected. There's no calculations done on any of that.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, that should be a latitude that you use to your advantage in the sense of if it's onerous to do it monthly, you wouldn't do it. If it's onerous to do it quarterly, you'd look and give it a liberal interpretation and do it monthly.
Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds like you would
Yeah, it
agree with
sounds,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I wanted to make sure you guys
Thank you
were,
very much.
all right. Thank you. Thanks for the time.
And so moving on to the HHS contract, that's something we did agree to last year, right?
Right, it was October-ish, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we had to develop a brand new grant agreement with the legal department. So we'd been working on that, and I think those are ready to go for the meeting on January 31st.
Okay, and what's the meaning of the termination date of 2024?
That the Housing Authority asked to extend that end date. They're assuming they will still be in process of building into.
Okay, so we don't give them $692,200 on day one, like last October when we decided.
Correct.
And so they will bill us against that number.
Mhm.
So once again, it's like a maximum amount and there's certain things that have to happen for them to draw against that.
Right, they'll submit
Okay.
an invoice to us with
Yeah.
what they've paid for, and then
Yeah.
we reimburse up to this amount.
And that helps you with your auditing responsibilities, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that was the preference of the auditor's office versus an upfront grant
Yeah.
amount, and then to sort of true it up later, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that because you do it up front, then how's the auditor gonna verify that all those were used as per the contract?
And how do you get it back?
Yeah,
If you have to.
yeah.
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 So those will be, and just a note too on the Housing Authority one, you see in the fund source there, it says DRF plus 1406. So I have the full grant amount included here, but 400,000 of that is coming from the 1406
Oh.
affordable housing funds
Yeah,
and the
okay.
remainder from document recording fees.
I thought that 1406 money was going to campus towers.
It could have gone to either one.
Either one would play.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
By the way, does this discussion help you?
Yes, it does actually, very much.
Okay, good. So you're on next
Okay.
again.
So moving on, community development block grants, we have a couple coming up. These are a little bit late in the year. Part of the delay, we've had the state calls program income come into the county. So when we have these old housing rehab projects that the county was part of funding, and when those homes sell or get refinanced, the owners have to pay off the county basically. And so we have had a couple of those situations come up in the last year, and it gets sort of collected at the county level, and it's called program income. So we had quite a bit this year, and the state was trying to figure out how to address that with us. So we've applied for and been awarded 2 community development block grants. These applications happened late spring. The awards come in like August, September-ish. And so the one is the Public Services Grant. This is the one that has historically been Meals on Wheels, which is what the application was for this cycle.
Okay, let me back you up a second. The first line, that was the revenue.
Correct. That's our contract from the state.
Okay, and that feeds into the bottom two then?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
So that first, well, it feeds into the first one. Sorry, I don't know how to separate that a little bit. I understand what you're saying. So the
Oh.
first line, the Washington State Department of Commerce, that's our state contract for public services grant, which is passed through on the Lower Columbia CAP contract.
Does that, I know that the area on aging has Meals on Wheels contracts also. This is totally independent,
It is separate. They're the same program,
different funding.
different funding. Yep.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so they use the county funding to serve. So this funding can't be used inside the city limits of Longview, for example. So the Area Agency on Aging funding can be used within the city of Longview. And
Okay.
so
You
they
got
use-
that, Mr. Dahl?
So they use this funding and they serve rural seniors up in Riderwood, down in Woodland, to deliver meals there. You'll see the fund source on that one says CDBG program income and federal. So the state has asked that we use program income first to fund this contract. And then if we use all of our program income, then we would draw against our state contract.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Well, I'm trying to get it square. So this first line, it shows revenue because these are homes we've helped people rehabilitate or whatever we've done. And when they've sold them or did something with them, some money came back to us. Am I
Yeah.
understanding that?
Yes, let me clarify the revenue line, the 68,000. That is an award from the state. So that is coming down in a state contract. The program income funding is separate. So the state is saying, we did a grant application and submitted the application to the state. They said, we award your project. Here's $68,000 for your project. But in the meantime, we had these houses that sold and the money came back to the county and it's just sitting in a county bucket. And so the state is saying, we have this award money for you and we sent it to you in contract, but we want you to use this program income first.
Oh,
And then
okay.
if you spend that, then you can tap into the state contract.
Yeah, I
And
was
so-
thinking in their state, in their
Right.
infinite wisdom, was going to take our revenue and then say, well, we'll give you this back.
Well, that's actually on the table, isn't it?
I think an option is to give it back to the state. Their preference is that you use it in, it has to be used, if you keep it at the county, it has to be used in existing CDBG contracts. So I tried to get some latitude with it to say, can we use it in other ways? Can we use it in this? It has to be a CDBG approved project that you can use this program income for.
And I know we ran into a home that I think we helped fix with CDBG funding, and it turned out that the fellow had bought a real mess, and it was not a livable home. And
Mm.
remember, there were people coming to us saying, can we refi? And I think I agreed, at least my vote was to agree with only one fellow because he brought to me a list of contractor estimates to fix things that are fundamental, not like get fancy new flooring, but to fix the plumbing so you could flush the toilet. kind of
Yeah.
Stuff.
Yeah, stuff like that.
So it was really not a livable home despite anything until he spent the money. So he he refinanced and didn't buy a vacation. Presumably, he fixed the plumbing. In a case like that, could we supplement the original CDBG grant? You don't have to think too hard on it because it's kind of an academic question, just trying to find out what flexibility we have on that.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with the housing rehab stuff and how that all worked, because I wasn't involved in any of those grants, but
Yeah,
I just,
we handled those out of the OFM.
it was out of OFM, yes.
Yeah,
And
okay.
so they're processing any of those items that come up. We haven't done any new projects. I think the counties had, at some point had said we're not doing any more rehab projects. So there hasn't been any new projects, but the county stays, on the lien or as a lien holder
Right.
for 10, 20, I don't know
It's-
exactly how many
It's a
years.
10-year thing after which
Sure.
it's forgiven. The question I have then is, how much did we collect on the people selling their house?
It's different, I think, for each home. So I know like one amount we collected back was $20,000. One amount was 16,000. It varies, I think, depending on,
So for the moment, we could have 100,000 in that pot, if you will,
I think we have 45,000,
plus the 68 then, if we needed to.
right?
Okay.
So,
We have a hand up from someone who probably has specific information for us. Go ahead, Ms. McKay. And there's Tracy also wanting to talk. Hi, Kaylee.
There we
Hello.
go. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. I was just going to weigh in a little bit if you guys had some more questions about this program. I think Gina, for the most part, kind of covered it all. The lien is recorded at 25,000 and the reconveyance is recorded at 25,000 and then it decreases by 2,500 every year following. So it just kind of varies and it
10-year
depends.
commitment.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes. So it just kind of depends on when they're doing this refinance or when they're selling their home.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's. Appreciate that.
Mhm.
Tracy, you had your hand up. Did I imagine you were going to chime in the same way?
Exactly. Kaylee handled it perfectly. Thank you.
So in terms of programs, I know we've discussed that a little bit, and you know that I think that the Meals on Wheels is a highly ineffective program, and I wouldn't be keen on supporting it again. Do you have any comment on that, Rick?
We've had some conversations on that. If we're going to do it, I think it needs to be done better. Like for example, the people in Ryder would get a frozen meal. I think there needs to be better work on whoever runs the program, part of using local, or at least trying to find local to supply that type of thing.
You bring up an interesting point. Ryderwood has its own already health approved kitchen and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think it can be, I haven't been totally and gone over and looked over every step, but it just looks to me on the outside that somewhat inefficient, and I think it can be better quality. If we got seniors that truly need, and they need to have a good product. I've had people show me some of the meals from the last time and I'm going, we need to do better. If we're going to spend the money, we need to do better. I'm just being honest with you. And I've talked to a couple of restaurants that said, if I knew I had to do 100 meals for lunch, we just schedule it and be done and they'd be hot and out the door. Now I know there's some that you have to watch salt and you have to watch all this other stuff, but
I
as it runs today, I think it's inefficient.
Yeah, and I even have a more fundamental problem in that anytime I've looked at the data, or I've talked to people, and I know anecdotes are pretty tough. It hasn't been a pretty picture, but also we talk about supporting people out in the hinterlands in a way that I don't think that's a safety net. And there are all kinds of arguments around it. Well, if we didn't do that, they'd starve to death. My favorite example was at the very first time I voted against this, I got pilloried and lambasted, and one of the key people lambasting me was a lawyer who's, I found out later, if it weren't for Meals on Wheels, my mother would not have eaten. She'd have starved. And I'm like, well, I learned he's a well-to-do lawyer. And I'm thinking, why would I want to essentially charge funds from somebody who's trying to earn a living to feed someone whose son is despicable, pardon me.
Yeah. And I don't know, I'm not here to blast providers, but sometimes it moves from a program that had good intentions at the start, and then it's more, it feels like they start chasing money for, like, what can you have? Maybe you have 5 people or 6 people. I've been out to that Riderwood community. I've eaten there 3 different times. I know the people behind there. There's no way that those people in that cafe would let anybody in their community not have a meal.
Yeah.
So I think there's a better job of reaching out to these communities, and they'll take care of their people, and they'll do it much better than we are. I just think it'd be done better.
So is anything that we've said, does anything come to your mind how we could improve the program?
Well, I would love to explore with CAP, and I know this is one of those weird rules with CDBG. This particular grant has to be passed through to CAP. But I'd love to sit down with them and really think about some of those different scenarios of like, okay, what would that look like maybe to sit down with different restaurants or the Riderwood Cafe and talk about how many people do you serve in Riderwood and what does that look like? And what would it look like to support the cafe to provide those meals?
Yeah.
Would they have volunteers that could deliver the meals? What does that look like? It'd be great. And the same thing with, people down in Woodland. What could that look like down in Woodland? I know they get frozen meals because of the distance to the kitchen where they're prepared. It's too far away to keep the meal at the temperature it's supposed to be kept at. And so they freeze them. So, but it would be good to explore some of those things.
Yeah, I think those conversations are helpful. I just, if your goal is to truly do the best for these seniors, then I think we can do better. And if you drive around Riderwood more than 2 times along their block, their little security and their golf carts come out. So they got a delivery system in place.
They'll load up the golf cart.
Yeah.
Those are supercharged, aren't they, those golf carts? So without a change, I will be still not going to vote for the Meals on Wheels. You discussed last time alternatives to it, to other ways we could spend the money under CDBG.
Correct. So CDBG has sort of this menu of public services that are allowable under this grant. Again, the pass-through entity has to be CAP for this particular funding. That's just a set state thing. But there's a variety of different services. It doesn't have to be Meals on Wheels.
And it doesn't have to go through CAP, or it always does?
It always does have to go through.
But we did our CBG contracts without going on the housing repair without going through CAP.
Right. So there are other CDBG grants that don't have that requirement,
But this one does.
this one does. The public services grant has that requirement. there are other activities we could look into. And, we get an opportunity each year to consider applying for this grant and can talk about, we always have, we have to do public hearing and all of that stuff and can explore the different activities and ideas. One thing we did last year with the second CDBG grant I'll touch on is, posted a request for qualifications to say, okay, this is the grant parameters. These are the allowable things that could be done. Submit a proposal, let us know what you might do. And so we could consider doing something like, well, it would have to be with CAP, but we could take a look at those allowable activities and try to identify some priorities.
I think competition is good.
Mm.
And I'm not trying to beat on CAP. I've worked with them on other things and I thought they've done a fine job. I just think it looks to me from the outside that there's room for improvement here. So if there's other things they can provide that maybe they're more efficient at and it better serves the community, I'm open to look.
Yeah, I've heard you say before that you really weren't in favor of non-infrastructure grants.
Yeah.
And this may be a grant where we would say, come time to apply for it, just would say, no, don't do it.
Sure. I mean, that's always the decision of the board to
Yeah.
when we're looking at those. So,
So without something more, this gives you an opportunity to think about what might trigger us to okay it. Otherwise, I will probably just say no.
okay. Okay, so the last CDBG contract there with Community Integrated Health Services. So this was a grant application that the county submitted to the state. We did a request for qualifications and solicited proposals from community partners. We only received one proposal through that process from Community Integrated Health Services. They're a behavioral health organization in town. Their proposal was to do a feasibility study to help them identify an appropriate location to purchase a house to house some of their behavioral health clients. So their request was for $10,000 for them to do that. We, as in the county, submitted that application to the state. The state awarded it and then said, hey, you have that program income, so go ahead and use that program income to support this contract. So they didn't issue a state contract. They said, this has been approved, but you have the funding in your program income to support this project.
What's the meaning of the 10,000 then?
That's the amount that was requested when the agency submitted their proposal, was the $10,000.
So that's what we requested. And they came back and said, no, use the money you've collected.
They said, we support your project, it's approved, but you already have the money to do it. So they said, use your program income to support this project.
So all that program income funds that they want us to use for this, is it eligible, like we're talking about, looking at other programs within CAP for Meal on Wheels? I mean, could you theoretically kind of lump that together and put it in one thing that we saw was maybe more beneficial?
I think we could look at the public services activities, and if there was an identified activity that we wanted to use some of that program income for, we would have to do an adjustment with the state on our contract, but they're open to that, I think. Part of the program income, the state wants to use it on activities that they've approved. And so these two contracts have, they were applications that the county submitted to the state approved them, which is why they're now saying, okay, we approve these activities, so use your program income for them. I do think we could look at the public services activities and use some of the program income within that contract with CAP to do a different type of activity. We just have to amend that with the state, which I think we've done before. Yeah.
Be honest with you, I don't know that they need to look for a house if the state does like I've been reading they did to the town of Tenino. They just bought a house and they're gonna put people in there anyways.
Yeah, the feasibility study is something I'm puzzling over. We had several groups, committees to find a new place for Camp Alabama and so forth, and that went on for more than a year, I think, and twice it
find a
was
place.
bounced.
Couldn't find the place.
Correct. They couldn't come to a determination. So I don't know what a contractor would do. So I'm not interested in that particular element.
Yeah, and I think part of it is part of it would be identifying, not just identifying a house, a location, but what they may need to do to that house, for example, to make it livable for X amount of behavioral health clients. So it could be, they could have to do some remodels, they could have to
Yeah.
do certain things.
Yeah,
So
I'm a negative on that.
Yeah, I had that same problem with when I was reviewing recreation programs at the state. The study ones just drove me crazy because let's spend money on actually do something instead of study it. So
Now,
if we could find a better way to use that, I probably would too.
one area that at least I've talked about before is, and I'm often too conservative in terms of, I think we're going to have trouble coming down the line. The inflation isn't going to, it's improved a little bit, but it's still a lot of built-in inflation. And there are people, particularly young people, who might even have a family and they've got a job, but they can't afford to live in a typical house or a typical small house in this, and those are all tied up right now. And so should the county pick up 5 acres someplace in the county and make that a place where I don't think of the refugee camps. Think of our guys up in it when they go to deployment in Iraq or Afghanistan. They've got totally livable conditions, and at least they have a place to go. And so until something else turns up, I wouldn't be opposed to trying to supply a safety net that lets them stay in with their employment, stay in the county, but provide them a place where they can park their car. They've got some facilities there. It would be more of a public kind of thing, like, yeah, I don't know how to manage. I'm just throwing out thoughts that we're going to have to deal with the problem with people not affording the house.
That's not a bad thought. And to be honest with you, in a couple of my conversations with building plan, we've kind of thought a little bit about that with the tax properties the county owns.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that needs to be explored a little bit. You have, and I don't know the history of it, and I don't know if it's private or how they did it, but you go up and you start to get in Chehalis and you have these, they're not big homes, but they're kind of like in a little community. Maybe they call them cottage. I don't know. They're fairly small and they're in this little community, and it may be an option for some of be a little more affordable.
So in that case, would we hire somebody to do a feasibility analysis of that? That's really the question for this contract.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I probably more discussion on it and see
All right.
where we're at.
Okay,
But it could put some of the tax properties we sit on to use.
Mhm.
where is Deborah? No, I'm only,
Yeah, she could come through the door, get her all wired up.
yeah. ERAP,
ERAP, yes. So, okay, moving on. So there's not an upcoming contract on ERAP, but Commissioner Mortensen asked that we include it on here. So the eviction rent assistance program, what you see on here is there's the contract with Washington State Department of Commerce, which is the revenue contract. And then just below it, the pass-through contract with Lower Columbia CAP, passing those funds down for rent assistance. This contract is set to expire June 30th of 2023.
So it's got about 6 months to go.
Correct.
And is this also what I would, in my world, call a line of credit?
Correct.
And it's an up to amount
Correct. It's a cost reimbursement.
based on certain criteria to get reimbursed.
Mhm.
how are we doing on that?
CAP has actually closed the wait list for that program. We have utilized about 7.2 million of the overall contract, the 9.4. So there's roughly 2 million-ish left.
If I wanted to get rental assistance, that door is closed for me
Mhm.
for the remainder of the contract time?
We anticipate with the individuals currently on the wait list, assuming they're all eligible for
Oh, okay.
assistance, that we would get through the remainder of the funding. So the wait list has been closed and they're not accepting applications at this time. So unless a large amount of the individuals aren't eligible, that would be the only case where they would reopen the wait list for that.
So they're seeing at this point that it's been utilized, it just hasn't all been spent.
Correct. Hasn't all been
They're-
processed.
They're crossing the Ts and dotting Is to make sure that qualifies.
So
Do we
before-
expect this to come to us again?
So my understanding is that the state, as part of that $100 document recording fee increase a couple of years ago that the state passed, they're using that money to create a more permanent rent assistance program. So I think they're building it into a different grant application. I don't know a lot about it at this time in terms of when or how much or anything like that or what it will look like. I just know that's their plan. I think we may hear more about that sometime this winter.
There were discussions in the past, and I know if I were able to do what I would like to do with this, there'll be hellfire and brimstone on my house and probably wouldn't make it out alive. But I think these are pernicious and counterproductive because they actually aggravate the problem. I remember one particular session when I got a property manager rather angry because after several questions, he was put in the corner and saying, on the one hand, they've got a backlog of people who want the apartments. He said, I got a backlog. I can now evict people. Yes. So I said, just evict them and you get your new tenants in there. Well, do you see the problem is they haven't been paying for 12 months. So this rental assistance was really an assistance to the property owner.
Yeah.
And I understand that that they were damaged also. But they now have no incentive at all to be competitive on the prices. And it's just like the college tuition. As long as the government subsidizes things, it's going to continue to grow. Rent utility, I mean, the utility was awkward because if you go to Winco and you purloin stuff, Winco doesn't come to the government and say, because of your programs, I got cheated and stolen from and robbed, and therefore you got to make up for it. But the PUD argued that's what it should be done here. They need the utility assistance. And I ran through some of the numbers. Their arguments were really pretty specious. I mean, they were saying, well, that would mean that the next utility bill on somebody would have to be up $100 or, you know, some number. And then you do the computations out there, say, no, you typically amortize things like that over several months, right? Or even a year, whatever. But they had to make it so instead of being an impact of $3 a month, and I'm not justifying that, it's still thievery that the public is paying for. But why do we want to go through more hands? Why do we want to pretend that that we're going to help people when we're actually helping people cheat?
Yeah. Where it crosses over for me, where and you've heard me talk about this in different things. I love entrepreneurs. I think they get out and they create, they take risk and they do things and sometimes they get rewarded handsomely for it. And I don't regret them doing that because they're out trying to produce. But then when something happens and stuff happens, you don't always know what it's going to be. They could change the tax laws. All of a sudden, whatever you produce isn't in favor or whatever it is. There's all kinds of myriad things that happen. And then the entrepreneur has to figure out how to manage that risk. It's not the taxpayer that's supposed to bail out that risk. And we've seen it with the payment protection program where businesses take these loans and then they're forgiven. So the taxpayer is paying for their entrepreneur that big word risk. And I think this kind of falls into that.
Yeah,
You know,
it does.
it's not, you just can't suck money out of a person's wallet to cover their risk. It's just.
So pertinent to this, I know you enjoyed that dialogue. Is there anything we can do to halt this program now?
It's always, all of our standard contract language includes termination clause, termination for convenience. So it's always, pleasure of the board to make those decisions.
Okay, and then there's, I think if we proceed with just allowing it to expire, we're still looking at a couple of million, it sounded like, but we have not been able properly to get the data that I've asked for a few times, which is I want a name, a recipient name, and the amount they received. And I was told, I was rebuffed enough that it seems pretty unreasonable that we cannot get that information.
We, as the contract managers, we have access to that information from CAP. So we can see all of that information. I do have a question. David had reached out recently about the contract language and
Who did? I'm sorry.
David Berger.
Oh, yeah.
Inquiring about the confidentiality language in the contract and what that looks like. I think where we run into challenges is if we're talking about, publicizing that information. So that's where we may hit some
Well,
roadblocks.
I've got two problems.
No, go ahead.
Specifically, I asked, probably sitting in this chair, a couple of times, and I was told basically both times, no way, no can do. It's private information, and you said you'd look into the contract, and you said they wouldn't give that information. So I'm puzzled why the answer is different now than it was then. The other thing, in terms of published information, we are all subject to PRR, and there's nothing private. People know how much you make. People know how much you charge on travel. People
Mhm.
know all those things because it's public information. Any money that gets taken from the taxpayer going out should be visible to the public. And if there's no reason for me to go and get a page spread on the Daily News and say, blah, de blah took this kind of money. So, that's not what I have intent, but I don't think I can morally and legally hide that money was given to a person.
Sure. And I think I do remember this coming up before and having discussions with legal about it. We as in HHS, we've always had access to that information, the specific names and all of that. And I believe that we would be able to share it with you as commissioners. But when we start getting outside of county employees, I think that's when we run into issues with the language that's in the state contract in terms of sharing that information. And that's where we ran into the roadblock before, was that we can see that information as the county, but sharing it publicly, there was a conflict with the language in those contracts.
Yeah, SBA, you can pull up SBA and see every PPP loan made across the United States. You can see Trump's son-in-law got $1 million. You can see all this stuff. So it kind of surprises me they don't just do that out there. But even if I couldn't get specific names, I think it would be telling if you say, okay, 10 businesses or whatever got 6 million of this. That tells you it's really going to a select few. It's not going to mom and pops that have a rental house and doing something with it.
Yeah, without being released from that kind of privacy issue, I would vote to terminate the contract as quickly as you can within the limits or the conditions of the contract, the termination clause.
Uh,
Your thoughts?
Well, I probably struggle with that a little bit because they've turned it off. They're not doing it, which means there's a line of people that have expectations. So I probably struggle a little bit with that.
Yeah, but
But
that's
it-
always the case.
Yeah, I realize that, but
Okay.
but then if the line is 3 businesses or whatever, it kind of, well, I'd probably say I'd need a little more detail. Who's waiting in the line?
Okay, maybe you can specify the detail you need and we can get together on this again fairly quickly.
Well, if it goes back to, I don't think the taxpayer should have to subsidize risk that an entrepreneur takes. So if you got big rental agencies and they're the ones that are in line and waiting to qualify,
It's all going to be landlords
yeah,
because the money only goes to the landlords or to the PUD.
Mhm. Or other utility district, not just the PUD, but other.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, but we can look at that breakdown of who the third-party entities that have received the assistance. We can look at that breakdown.
So you would look for like a histogram that says how many people got $10,000 or how many entities got $10,000, how many entities got $20,000, something like that.
something like that.
Yeah.
Look at the trend of who's received.
Is there
the
any
assistance.
cap on
There's
a
a cap,
business?
not by business.
It's 6 months or 12 months in arrears one can go.
Oh, I'll have to look to make sure the programs have changed over time.
Yeah.
I know. So,
And everybody's saying state can change the contract anytime they want.
Um,
okay, so I'll pull some information on that and connect more on that one then. Anything else on the rent assistance or,
I don't know what else there is to say on that,
okay.
except I am steadfast, am I not?
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay, so on the, if you flip the spreadsheet over, the health department side, we have a couple of contracts coming up on the health department side. One is our favorite contract, the consolidated contract. So we have an amendment to our consolidated contract in regards to drinking water. This is adding funding for Group B water activities. So this supports funding to support Group B water systems. This is the funding that allowed us to decrease the permit fee down to 0. We did that on our 2023 fee schedule, and this is the funding that allows us to do that.
That's already baked in, so it's not gonna come up again.
This will, it will come to the board in an amendment. We received this funding last year. It will, I believe it's on for the 31st, actually, in an amendment, just this, adding this $25,000 for the Group B activities.
And your
But we-
current fees are down to 0 then.
Correct.
We took the fees away when we got this.
Yep.
Okay.
I think we ought to spend the money advocating, I'm just gonna make a joke out of it, so I won't. I was thinking of beer.
And then there's 2 amendments. There's one regarding solid waste. So we have an amendment to our contract with the Department of Ecology. This is an amendment to an existing contract, and it's just decreasing the fund amount. And so when we first entered into this contract, there was an allocation amount that is more than we anticipate utilizing. And so this is decreasing the contract just to true up what we think, what we anticipate utilizing. And this is for solid waste investigation and assistance or responding to complaints about solid waste.
So this is like if I talked to Susan about, I was walking through the woods and somebody had thrown pile of garbage there. That's the kind of thing we're
Correct.
talking about here.
Exactly. When we get those complaints in, this supports our costs to respond to those complaints and help
So
resolve them.
last time I went through the area, there was really disgusting what people do. And it's just bunch of, it was like somebody took quite a big pickup load of just packaged trash and just threw it in there. Yeah, okay. So I talked to, it turned out that they had left some documentation in that trash. Okay, so they were tracked down, but I don't know whether they paid a fine or anything like that. But the next time I was wandering through there, it was essentially still there.
Mm,
And that was quite a time later. So I'd hate to think that we're returning the dollars when we should have paid somebody to go there, if nothing else, pay somebody to go there and clean up the mess that was left. I mean, we even did that for Camp Alabama, where we said we would pick up the tab, certainly the waste disposal tab.
Yeah.
yeah. And I know it just depends too, like, I don't know if they, cleaned it up because someone said, hey, we got a complaint, that there's this garbage. And they may have cleaned it up and then let it pile up again, and then we don't know until there's another complaint that comes along. So it really depends on the situation.
Right. Right.
And I know there's a fine line too between, when it becomes really a solid waste hazard versus a eyesore. So there's a fine line there too.
Yeah, I've gotten a few calls where it's pretty extreme. You have to really get out of the car, look around the tree. Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I've recreated for years on motorcycles and gotten out, and you see some amazing stuff they get back in the woods. I don't know how they do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've caught people before and wrote down license plate numbers, and tell them, don't dump it here. And I talked about this anecdote. My place in Idaho, we go out and there's nothing. And I try to think, well, what's the difference? And there's no dumping fees over there. The landfill is free. And I think I pay
Mhm.
extra on my property taxes, so I'm subsidizing that, but I'm almost okay with that because you go out and you don't have cars and old washing machines and all this other nonsense.
I would go along with that with one modification is if you do dump and we find out it is you, I want you crucified.
Yeah, big time,
Yeah.
because there's no reason for it. There's no cost to take it to the dump.
Mm-hmm.
That just may be my little area in Idaho, but
Yeah, that's pretty complicated around here because there are
Yeah.
a lot of extant contracts. and
Yeah.
Mhm.
It'd be difficult, but in building and planning, you have a fellow now, it's called a compliance, somebody, what's the title?
I couldn't,
It's all before your both times.
I haven't
Do you know
become
who I'm talking
as
about?
familiar with them.
The new, is it nuisance abatement officer? Is that what you're talking about?
Nuisance abatement officer. I'm wondering if this would fit in there because a lot of what he's gonna do is neighbors complaining about garbage and trucks and
Yep,
rusted vehicles.
yep. I think they work closely with that officer. Yep.
Okay, so, but even at that, there's, we wouldn't offset the expense of the nuisance abatement guy with this?
Oh, I don't think, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Okay,
We can look more into it though.
this ALS is pretty scary.
Pretty scary.
It's
This-
a bad disease.
Oh. So the last item there is an amendment to our contract with ALS Environmental. This is for some water testing. We historically have offered, for example, we were just talking about the Group B water activities. We've offered free testing for those Group B water systems, and this contract allows us to reimburse ALS for that testing. So we have an amendment. It's kind of a funny one because it's going till the original contract expired in August or September. And just sort of an oversight, we needed to extend it to the end of the year. So this amendment will extend it to the end of the year. We do hope to have a new agreement for the new year so we can continue to offer that testing and reimburse for that water Group B testing.
So this would just be to square up the books, if you will.
Yeah.
Okay. And the relationship between this item and the 25,878, that's for your time to do the Group B inspections.
It's for our time. I believe we also utilize that to pay for that testing.
So who does, I assume you would take a sample from, on inspection, a sample, and you saying the cost for that is already included in the 28,000?
Correct.
So these are two completely independent items.
Yes and no. Yeah, right. I mean, it's separate because the last item is a separate contract we have with ALS Environmental. So, there's certain costs for them to run the specs on a water test and
Right.
and do that. So we just reimburse that cost for those Group B systems.
But where did that sample come from?
Come
The Group
from
B well?
the Group B well, most often the homeowner, and we just sort of help facilitate that testing, the water collection. I know they have to do I think they have to do regular testing, certain testing annually, certain testing once every 3 years, for example. Yep,
On wells that are community.
on wells that are, the
Yeah.
Group B, yep.
How many users on a Group B?
Oh, I always get it mixed up. I
Yeah,
know.
I do too.
The Group B serves less than 25 people per day. Group
Okay.
A is more than that.
Okay.
So group Bs or contractor builds a housing development and puts it all in there and then can't maintain it, right? Yeah,
Yeah, and the county ends up having
he
to
ends up
eat that.
taking it.
It can get ugly. That's how we end up owning a few systems.
Yeah. So that's it for upcoming contracts.
Okay. Thank you for that. What's next?
What's next? Let's see. You had asked about the KLMA Emergency Fund Award.
Yeah. That one was a kind of a programmatic issue, or I would say I wanted to be sure my colleague understood where that funding came from, because we collect, could you tell us how we collect this emergency fund stuff?
Sure. So it's a sort of a policy decision of the board. There's nothing set in document recording fees that says, we have to do this emergency fund process. The board has sort of, over the years have, I don't want to say set aside, but have set up to $35,000 potentially for emergency fund applications. We've, in my experience, have never even gotten close to that amount, but we sort of have that amount set aside for these uses. So we have an application on our website that's up year round that agencies can apply for the emergency fund assistance. And when those applications come in, we review it with the board to make a determination.
Okay, so the word again is key to me is emergency. And this emergency program has, I should say, this KLMA program this is the third year we would be funding it?
We have funded it once before. They put in a request that that was denied 1 year.
But they came back again and somebody said, oh yeah, of course, and it was paying for the year before. And that really stuck in my craw because it's again, not an emergency, it's a reimbursement.
This is the second time
This is the second time?
we've awarded funding for
Okay.
that project.
And there have been, the first time, I know we were buying light fixtures and stuff. And that seemed like a weird emergency expense.
I think there was some items they were enhancing the security, I think, of
Right.
where the shelter was. So I think there was some
Yeah.
lighting and some things like that, some locks or doors or something like that.
So in the spirit of my past objections, I like if you attach a name emergency to something, it should really represent an emergency. I cite Inslee's COVID emergency as an example of the gross misuse of the word. And I don't want to partake in that. So I just want to be sure you understood this came out of the emergency fund, even though they've been around for 3 years and there was this winter is no colder than last winter or the winter before. Okay,
Did commissioners give any guidance on emergencies?
There's a document that outlines the emergency fund process. It's also in our 5-year plan to address homelessness because it is document recording fees. I know a couple of years ago, the board had asked that the Homeless Housing Task Force review that process annually and give input on the language that's included there. But I may have given you a copy. If I haven't, I will, of how it talks about emergency. It does specifically say, sort of in the criteria, it does say severe weather as one of the allowable criteria. But
So-
it's completely fluid. So if the
Yeah.
board, if the
So-
board wants to revisit that, we certainly can.
So if does it apply to homeowners too?
So
So if.
It does not allow for individual, as it is right now, it does not allow for individual assistance. And so the way that it's currently set up would be for entities to apply. But like I said, it's fluid, so we can revisit what the criteria is.
okay. You want to try the next one? That one's nice and straightforward.
Okay, so
That was said tongue in cheek.
yes, let me finish my thought here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay. So how we interact with the Board of Health was sort of a question, I think, posed to us. I don't know that it's really set in stone at this point. We have our new expanded Board of Health that has been sort of getting their foundation set. And so we're still learning what that dynamic looks like and how we interact with the Board of Health and how we interact with the Board of County Commissioners in terms of, what goes to them, what goes to you, for example. There's, the RCW outlines the certain powers and duties of local Board of Health. And so, I anticipate they will operate under that realm. And then, we're here to provide any information, that we can for the Board of Health.
Yeah, one of the reasons I'm a little, let me go back in history. The Board of County Commissioners was the Board of Health up till recently, as long as I've been on the board.
Mm.
And we pretty much were not active in telling anybody anything. We would have conversations with the health officer, and the health officer would present something, but I never could sink my teeth in anything. I didn't think the health officer was driving anything. We weren't driving anything. So I wondered who was the driver. And I think the new Board of Health people are wanting to probably become the driver. They're the Board of Health.
Mhm.
And in that sense, I think have to be careful. I'm just throwing out possible understanding. So they would come up with something, and the Board of Health would decide, yes, we're going to do something. And if that something involved staff or expense of some kind, then it will go to the Board of County Commissioners. That would have to agree with that or not agree, of course. And I was thinking that the board should be far more active, the Board of Health should be far more active in its area than the Board of County Commissioners acting as the Board of Health ever have been. And at the same time, I think we all have different understanding and aspects. And there is a hierarchy. The buck has to stop here. But I'm looking at a cooperation where I would think the Board of Health says, I want to do Plan X. HHS says, well, we'd be glad to help you do Plan X, but it's not feasible unless this, and this, and this is in place. So collectively would come up with plans. Again, before all this, we were really compartmentalized.
Mhm.
You came up with the ideas and we'd say, where's the rubber stamp? And I want to change that. And I think that's the intention of the new Board of Health.
I'm good with them being active as long as decision making at the end of the day falls in an elected position's hand. I read through some of that stuff and it gives a lot of power, and if it gets to where a health officer can say, shut down your restaurants again, I'm not going to do that. You get what I'm saying? I don't want to.
Exactly. That's where
there's no recourse on those people. There's recourse on us.
And that's where you and I agree. I agree with you completely. The health officer, I look at as being someone who's pretty much like your grandfather, sits back and doesn't do anything until there is really what I would call a countywide problem. When I don't know if you remember, the very first time Krager came to speak to us, it was in the GMR. And there was the beginning of problems with the first Camp Alabama.
Mm.
And people were really interested. Some people were interested, particularly Dennis wanted to use the health officer as an instrument to call an emergency such that you had to shut down the camp or do something special, force the hands of something else. And I think certainly Krager was like, no, I don't think so. And certainly Dr. Melnick was pretty clear on that. And then I chimed in on behalf of them. That would have been a misuse of the
Right.
and opening up a Pandora's box. I look at the health officer for some of the bigger picture things. I look at us for sort of the more local, maybe transient pictures of things.
Yeah. I have zero problem with ideas and stuff like that. I just, where I draw a line is the voters have to have recourse on big decisions, and that's the people they put in here.
I agree completely.
Yeah.
And I would suspect, well, we'll see what the full board
Yeah.
says on that. Yeah, there's, I don't know, is there anything you'd wish to add in there?
I agree with kind of how you're thinking about it in terms of, we could certainly have conversations and explore with the Board of Health what they see as, different priority areas, different things like that. And then it, would be part of our role to look at how we could address those things and then bring that, bring different options back to the decision makers of, okay, these are some different options that we could look at. These are different ways we could do this or address this and go from there.
So I think Board of Health meetings next Tuesday,
Mhm.
you'll be able to attend, right?
Mhm.
Good, because there'll be a lot of questions. We're struggling with bylaws. And that may take up the whole time. There's several other issues. My mind is slipping right now. You're laughing because that was an understatement, right?
We do have one item on the agenda. There's a code that needs to be updated. And so we're going to do a really high level, and that does fall to the Board of Health, is my understanding,
Okay,
to
so-
consider.
So that's an example of you say, we've got an issue. It is your issue. Fix it or tell us to fix it.
So we have, this is a code issue, that it's a code that needs to be updated regarding health and sanitation. And so it falls under the Board of Health to adopt those policies, those codes. So we're going to give just a high level overview next at the Board of Health meeting next week. And then provide a draft of the code, provide a draft language.
Yeah. You said you had to be gone by 5. Would that apply also next Tuesday?
We're starting 3.5 hours earlier next Tuesday.
Well, but I think the longest meeting I had here was from 9 till 3.
Oh, that's a long one.
Yeah, trying to remember where that was. You mean you missed it?
Well,
The
I don't
answer is
remember
no.
now. I know, I'm going, when you started talking, what came to my mind was the syringe exchange meeting. That was a long one too.
Yeah,
That was a long time ago.
okay. Shall we move on to the next one?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with the direction we're talking about on Board of Health.
I beg your pardon?
I said I'm comfortable with the direction we've been
yeah.
discussing here.
The website is something we have talked about, and some people are very sensitive about it. And I've been sensitive only to the extent that I think a very significant value we can provide the public is a balanced view of things. And I don't think we have that. And then there are just some, I tried fiddling a little bit with the website, and website design is you get 10 people and you get 15 designs. And I'm hoping not to jump into that, but I do want to see if we can agree that our most valuable contribution is to try to sift through the chaff. And when there's an ambiguity, we can put things in the pro category and the con category on issues. A thing, for example, that I thought we sadly lacked on COVID in general was the risk versus stakes on vaccination. And that we ran the board here without a mask mandate, and we were successful in doing that because I think it made sense, and I bet you couldn't see in the statistics. Oh, well, we can explain that data because they didn't wear their mask at the meetings. We still try to be careful about that, but a lot more hierarchical, detailed information. I think you don't have to mandate things if people trust you, and we don't have the trust factor in the county. Or, I mean, the public doesn't trust government to start with, and we haven't earned it. I'm trying to figure out how to earn it. So I think you understand where I'm fundamentally coming from. And we get harped on a good deal for the lack of utility of our website in general. And I'm thinking the HHS website is in there too. It's not the kind of thing that is addressing human-friendly aspects.
Yeah. What I would say, my thoughts on that type of stuff is whatever we do needs to be directed towards our 111,000 citizens. If we just go to regurgitate that the Fed says, and then the state says, and we say, we don't even need a website because they can get it anywhere.
Mhm.
Each, our people, I have a lot of faith in people. I think we give them the information, the good, the bad, hey, there's some experimental they've done here, or they've done this or whatever, and people can make their decision from that. It really needs to be, just my humble opinion, it needs to really be geared to our citizens. We're not gearing ourselves to the state or to the feds, because they're bigger and whatever, but it doesn't mean they know everything. I think we're as smart as they are. We
Mhm.
are able to read, we're able to
You're
discern.
insulting us.
Huh?
You're insulting us.
Well, okay, I think we're smarter than they are.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think we know our county better than they do, and I have full faith and trust in our citizens that they have the ability to make the best decisions for themselves. And that's really only my comment is, I want to make sure that we're really geared to our county, and we're giving them what they need to make a good, sound decision on their behalf.
At the moment, who does your website? Is that the two of you, or that's Miss
It's-
Harris?
It's a good question. It's a team effort. So we recently acquired a staff member from IT that will begin actually doing our website very soon. So Kristen
Right.
came over to us from IT. She'll be really taking that on. In fact, one of the projects she's working on this week is reorganizing it, because it got really messy over the past several years where we were just plugging stuff in there in a hurry. So like refining the menu so there's less clicking and getting to things better. And she's really got a lot of insight towards kind of what you talked about. What does the community want to see? What do they want to see? And she's also going to be working on our social media as well in the same respect. So there's several of us that maintain it depending on what the topic is. Like environmental health is maintained mostly by environmental health themselves, so like Jesse Smith, and then some of the staff over here at the EHU. And then it really depends on the category on the website.
So it's reasonable for us to lay website issues as an obligation for HHS. Okay.
And I would say specific to our web pages, obviously. I mean, like I don't have access to anybody else's, but that would be specific to the HHS web
Yeah.
pages. Yeah.
I know maintaining
I beg your pardon?
maintaining can be a big job.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I know Kristen's also kind of really engulfed herself in finding broken links and all those kinds of things, because we neglected it for a while. That happens. And really staying on top of it and making sure it's current, it's not broken. There's nothing worse than people going to something and clicking on it and it's broken. I know I hate that myself.
Yeah, it's no different than anyway. I think if we're going to provide a service, we need to do the best we can for the people we serve. Simple as that.
So the next one is interesting. Maybe you could give us just an overall structure staffing update. And if we get too specific, we may have to go into executive session.
Yeah, so Carol handed out just before the meeting, 2 documents. One that is called What We Do, and that's sort of a programmatic overview of the different bodies of work in our department. And then the larger document is an org chart. The colors correspond with the programs on here. So it all kind of lines up, but I'll just kind of do a high level, and then we can get into some specifics if we need to. So,
There are only 2 sheets here, or?
yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So it's sort of separated into the different sections of our work, and you see sort of Carol and myself and Dr. Krager up at the top with an administrative assistant. And then we have the different sections of work, community health, starting on the left, community health section, environmental health, human services, other programs, and then we have sort of our administrative accounting staff, customer service, that type of thing. So this is all the staff we have under Health and Human Services doing the work in our department. I think you had mentioned the new positions, wanting to get an update on the new positions.
Sure.
So we had last state fiscal year, I'm going to say that. I don't like to say last year because I'm really talking about the state fiscal year. Was the first time the state allocated the large portion of foundational public health services dollars. When the state did that, we started some conversations with the board about utilizing some of those funds in different program areas. Throughout that year, the board approved 5 new positions in HHS utilizing those funds. So those positions are an application specialist, a public health nurse, infection prevention specialist, and 2 environmental health specialists, one that is on-site septic operations and maintenance work, and then the other is working with schools on school environments. So those were new positions last year. And just to give a brief update,
Are they on the big sheet?
yes.
Okay.
To give an update on those, to be honest, recruitment, as you've heard probably from other departments, recruitment has been challenging. So most of those positions were filled very recently in September, October-ish. And so they are doing training, getting acquainted with the roles and that kind of thing at this point.
And these 5 came from that state grant.
The consolidated contract.
What's the longevity of that contract?
The foundational public health services funding that's awarded in that contract, the state uses the word in perpetuity. That's anticipated to continue year after year.
But you have to apply for it each year.
We don't have to apply. It's my understanding, you probably know better, they allocate this funding to local health jurisdictions across the state.
Okay. Your funding is mostly through grants, right?
We are entirely special revenue.
Entirely?
We're entirely special revenue, but it's not all grant. It would be fees and grants.
I'm sorry, you're really hard for me to hear. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
sorry. And I have a cough drop in my mouth because I've had a cold, so.
I've
excuse me.
got my ears plugged with something that's supposed to be healthy.
Absolutely. Yes. So we are special revenue, so we don't get any county general funds, but we are funded by fees, like local fees, as well as state and federal grants. So it's both funding streams, but it is special revenue, so it's not county general fund.
The local fees, how do you determine what those fees should be?
So those are mostly environmental health. So those would be, the food inspections and licensing. Those are I think we did a fee study in 2020 to see the actual cost of performing those services and establish the fees. We kind of revisit that every so many years to make sure that we are costing out what the cost of the service is, because we can't charge more than the cost of the service. And then also would be vital records, so birth and death certificates. We have 2 full FTEs that do vital records, and those fees are regulated by the state. So for every birth or death certificate copy that is purchased through us as certified copies, they're $25 each. So those would be the foundation for the fee part of the health department revenue.
If I wanted to open up an eatery, I would have to get a permit.
Correct.
And what's the fee structure there? Is it depending on, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's detailed and complicated, as one would expect. I believe the fees are based on risk. So depending on the type of food. So if it's an espresso cart, it's going to be a much smaller fee than it would be for a large scale restaurant with full restaurant menu and in-service dining and that type of thing. So I think they title it to be, it's risk-based, based on how risky what you're cooking is. If it's a bakery, it might be different. If it's a large restaurant, it's going to be different
Got
than
it.
a small restaurant.
How do we compare to other counties and
Are you talking fee-wise?
fee-wise? Yeah.
I'm going to be honest and tell you that I do not know the answer to that question. I
Okay.
don't think that we have recently compared it to other counties.
Yeah, I have difficulty with some of the revenue outfits we have here, special revenue, because there isn't any incentive to be conservative I have this fight with 911, or I used to. I gave up. They won. They take all their costs, which I might hold inside here in a globe, and whatever it is, they have some very fancy formulation that sort of doesn't make too much sense to me as to how all the entities pay. And if the costs grow, they all expect to pay. But we're in a modern age, and in this particular case, they should have an incentive because to be quite economical, because nothing says we can't have an outfit in Omaha, Nebraska do the 911. The telecom stuff is all there. Google Earth is there. There's just a lot of support capabilities. We got cameras up and down the freeway. We got cameras in town. So it's all possible, but they don't see that. So the self-comparison is always going to lead to growth. So I'm asking you, how do you prevent that?
Yeah, and we could definitely do maybe a comparison of like counties, counties that are similar to us. We wouldn't want to obviously compare ourselves to King County. It's its own creature. But some similar counties like Benton Franklin, might be a similar county to ours. Grays Harbor could be, a similar county.
Yeah.
We could compare our fees to what they're charging.
There's a trick to trying to figure out how to compare apples to apples,
Mhm.
because I would claim in King County, the only problem of discrepancy that I would see is they're very compact.
Yeah.
And we're not compact.
Yeah, I don't think I would ever compare us to them for so many reasons that I don't want to state on camera.
I think I'll quote you. Questions, Rick?
I'm just taking it in here.
Okay, do we want to press in any area or understand more in detail? Do we want to do here, let me just say as a general thing, because you are self-funded, doesn't mean there is an interest in Olympia and in Washington, DC to expand programs. Unfortunately, I don't think it's a good interest. So in the past, I've been a little frustrated because I get the message there is funding available, but I don't get the message, let me tell you what problem we're trying to solve. And that has caused me a lot of frustration trying to figure out. The last thing I want to do is make a mistake, but if I'm shut off from understanding discussion, which at least we're having here, I can ask, like, one of the things that was relatively unpopular was, well, I don't know, at some point, do you want to go? If I start to name the positions, I don't want to cause anyone any anxiety.
I appreciate that. If we need, we can, if we need to, we could go go that route.
How do you want to do this, Rick?
I would defer to what makes him comfortable and if we're talking about, if we're going to talk about specific positions, I'm not interested in making employees nervous either.
Right, but as we drill down into things, people might come away with an impression that isn't correct. Whenever you ask questions, my experience has been people get panicky
Yeah,
and alarmed
I don't think we're threatening anything. Intent isn't to,
it doesn't matter what your intent is,
Yeah.
it's what is perceived.
yeah.
Jessica's got her hand up.
Jessica, oh, Jessica, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, but we can't see you.
Oh, sorry. I wasn't a panelist, so let's see.
Oh, it doesn't matter. Oh, there you are.
Hi.
Yeah.
I would recommend going into an executive session if we want to talk about any potential changes in positions.
Yeah, I think
Especially if
that-
they're union employees, we would go into executive session for collective bargaining.
I certainly appreciate that. And would you be okay with that, Rick?
Yeah,
I think we're at the point where we would start now. Would you be willing and able to join us?
I can come over there.
Okay. And the category would be,
Collective bargaining.
okay. And you, of course, Kelly, you know the RCW? Okay. And you want to know how many minutes we start out with, right? So we'll see you in the usual spot.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you. You want to take a quick break of any kind? You want to take a break?
yeah.
It is 3:46, 3:47. How much time do you need for a break?
5 minutes.
Okay, let's resume. There's a proper term for this. We'll be in recess until 3:55, at which time we will go into executive session.
For
Sound
how
good?
long? For how long is the executive session?
I'm pretty sure it'll go longer than 15, but let's start with 15. That's ours.
The board is extending the executive session for a period of 30 minutes until 4:40 PM.
Oops. Good luck on the match.
We're back from executive session. We appreciate your patience. If you hung on, there were no decisions made. We discussed any number of issues with respect to negotiations. So on that basis, let me ask my colleague if there's anything else he wishes to discuss. Remember, this is an opportunity for commissioners to talk, which otherwise we're not allowed to do outside of the public view. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it's close enough.
Yeah. I don't really have anything.
Okay, it's been long. Thank you, everybody. This meeting is now adjourned.